Hey everybody, author Jeff Brown here. Just wanted to tell you a little bit about my Abandonment Wound healing course that just became available for affordable download at jeffbrown.co in the last couple of weeks. When you're inside of a creative process like this, you never really know how it will be received by people who purchase it and download it. And I've received a number of very, very profound and positive emails from people who have struggled with this wound, the abandonment wound, for a long, long time, and have made very little progress, and who are having a very different experience in the heart of this course, a very favorable and supportive healing experience. So just want to tell you a little bit about the course itself and why it is that I felt that it was important to write it. Part of it was because of my own personal journey, which I talk about a bit in the course, particularly in the intro audio. My struggles with what I call JAB, the jealousy, abandonment, betrayal trigger, something I coined it that at some stage because my experience of abandonment was intertwined with jealousy and betrayal and early life issues that were manifest in relational and behavioral patterns. But I also noticed over the years as I struggled with the way this wound lived itself out in me, that it wasn't just about relationship patterns. It just wasn't just about attachment style issues. I cover a lot of that in the course, and not just in terms of romantic partners, but also in terms of friends and family of origin dynamics, how we perpetuate those dynamics, how we go back for more when there's no way we're not going to feel abandoned, how we don't let them go, or how we race away from them in a way that's actually sourced in our fear of being abandoned again, and it actually keeps us caught in the abandonment wound cycle. So let me just read a little bit to you from the intro where I try to sort of pull a number of threads out. Maybe you'll see yourself in this, the ways in which this particular wound, which I consider to be a primary, primal wound, almost like the nexus wound for all of our other wounds, often stem originally from this core material. So let me just read a little bit about that, see if you see yourself in it. Okay. As my journey unfolded, it became clearer that this wound did not only come to life in those moments of intense relationship triggering, it also lived actively below the surface, permeating my patterns and issues, influencing the way I looked out at the world itself. It really was everywhere I looked, disguising itself as pseudo-wisdom and freedom and transcendence, the defenses of a young man not ready to face his stuff, but actually permeating my way of being, my relational choices and behaviors, my path to and away from a feeling of home. That's the thing about the abandonment wound. We can imagine it something very specific, a singular issue in and of itself, but it is often so much more than that. It is often a self-perpetuating way of being, one that seemingly avoids more experience of abandonment, but actually brings more of them our way. It cuts so deep and was felt so early in our lives that it influences every system, our thinking, our emotional life, our physical well-being, our notions of meaning, directionality, partnership, everything. In extreme examples, one has to wonder how we can know the world without it. In this course, you'll have an opportunity to recognize where the wound lives inside you and to come to terms with how it may or may not have influenced your life. And most importantly, to get to the roots and to heal that which is ready to be healed. Let me say a little bit more. I want to talk about abandonment wound and the relationship to finding your path and purpose in a minute. But as for how it's manifest or shows up in our lives, it's very difficult to generalize about. It can show up in the most subtle or complicated of ways, as an overreaction to a slight in a relationship, as a pang of irrational jealousy that arises out of nowhere, as an act of betrayal on your part that you were sure was fueled by attraction, but that you figure out later was fueled by your need to betray first before being betrayed, as a dramatic overreaction to the end of a friendship that wasn't actually that significant in your life, as a desire to get back together with someone you rejected when you find out that they're now seeing someone else. That was much of my experience with Jab. As a certainty that you're about to be fired that isn't grounded in the reality of your work circumstances, as a sudden fear of going out in public because it feels less triggering to be alone at home where no one can reject or abandon you. and it can appear in the form of a myriad of patterns and ways of being. In some, and this is where it gets interesting, right? Because you wouldn't normally think these things are necessarily connected to abandonment wound because they seem so different from each other. But check this out. In some, a perpetual need for freedom from attachment, right? Free spirits, or not. In others, a desperate need for connection, so fusers, mergers, codependent stuff. Sometimes there's a fear of engulfment, right? Feeling trapped. That's why the pandemic brought this up for a lot of us. Sometimes as a tendency towards codependency. Sometimes in the form of a monastic life and an effort to avoid one's triggers with the world. In others, in the form of a life of service, in a determined effort to become so needed that no one ever leaves you. Sometimes it can show up in refusal to commit to any life path or person, or its opposite, a desperate need to affix to commit to something, someone, anything. Sometimes it shows up in the decision to choose a safer relationship or a less challenging career. Other times as the path of a risk taker, right? Because you're never ever living safe, because safety feels unsafe. So you just stay on the edge all the time, as an example. Sometimes as a fear of intimacy, sometimes as a desperate need for intimacy. For some, it compels them to dissociate or disconnect from their family of origin. For others, it compels them to cling to them even tighter. Things that we do or don't do, either in an effort to avoid feeling abandoned again, or as a reflection of our deeper need to be triggered so that we can finally look at and heal the wound. In short, there's very little in our lives that cannot be impacted by an unresolved abandonment wound. The way that it manifests itself really depends on how you experienced and responded to the originating wounds, how deep the wounds go, and how you are organized internally and externally. The other thing I wanted to say about this wound is how connected it is, in my experience, to what I call sacred purpose. You could call it whatever you want, your gifts, your callings, the reasons, your reasons for being, why you were incarnated in this life. My experience was that for me, for the longest time, my sacred purpose demanded that I do deeper levels of emotional work. I knew there was another path in me, the path of a writer, as an example, but I couldn't quite get to it. So I would sit down with like piles of paper and notes to write my first book, but I couldn't. I was too agitated, too uncomfortable in my own skin. And I think just sort of sitting in that stillness made me feel connected to my anxiety of feeling rejected, abandoned, all those early life feelings. So I had to go deeper and farther into this very uncomfortable emotional healing, excavation, transformation process in order to clear enough of this material, heal enough of this material, develop enough of an inner adult, inner child dynamic, a maturation process, so that I could finally reach the stage where I could bring my purpose to life. Because if you're running away from yourself, or if you're lost inside of an unresolved process all the time that keeps living itself out in all kinds of different ways, if you're still kind of fragmented and fractured and not yet feeling cohesive and whole, or cleared through enough that you can recognize what your true path is and have the energy inside to express it. I mean, with our material buried, it's very hard for us to find the energy because our system is somewhat depressed, right? Depression is frozen feelings, so all that unresolved material keeps us contained and dampened energetically. So we don't have the energy to find our path, and we certainly don't have the energy to actually actualize our path. So my experience of this wound, not only was it everywhere in my life, I learned that if I didn't do the deepest levels of healing, I couldn't find my path. I certainly couldn't live my path. And I couldn't reach the stage where I could do the work that I'm doing in the world right now. So let me just read a quick paragraph on that from the last class in the course. One of the reasons why purpose is so relevant with respect to this wound is because our abandonment wound left us feeling so small, so insignificant, so unworthy of asserting our right to exist. It left many of us feeling like we're too much or too little or both, and that we have no right to be here, to take up space, to enjoy our earthly ride. And so we don't have the audacity to contemplate, to look for, to fully actualize a purpose or a plan, or sometimes even a direction, because we aren't sure we're allowed and because we don't have the confidence that we need to look for it. We often close down energetically and organize our lives around a smaller, less visible version of ourselves. When we can find our way to our purpose, or to a purpose that serves us until the next purpose arises, we turn this narrative around and build ourselves up with our purpose as our foundation, no longer concerned with how others perceive us, or concerned with being left and abandoned. Our choices begin to emanate from our own inner compass. You feel called to express all that you are, not because you want someone else to take notice and validate you, but because it's a natural manifestation of your aliveness. You're alive to your value and your offerings, right? That's the real freedom. And your self-actualization continues to demand that you express them fully. So that's where you get to if you do deeper work in the heart of this wound. And it's a hard wound to work, I mean, especially when it's activated and triggered. It's all you can do to maintain and corral it and contain it. So in this course, I try to cover a lot of bases. A healing process, for sure, exploration of the ways in which the wound lives itself out in your life, habits that are formed, patterns that seem normal to you, but that actually emanate from the material. And I developed something I called ARTT, which is an inner adult, inner child dynamic, and the fortification of that dynamic, because it was my experience that it wasn't just about healing, it was also about growing. I had to grow, I had to solidify so that I wasn't just an abandoned inner child alone. So when the abandoned inner child gets activated, there's an inner adult there to interface rather than looking for it outside of myself forevermore in unreliable places. I had to learn how to provide it to myself, right? So to deal with the part of me that was actually self-abandoning, and in that way perpetuating the problem. So if any of this calls to you, check out, it's affordable. It's sliding a scale from $89 up at jeffbrown.co. It'll be there now and it'll be there continually for those who are interested. And if you just go on the landing page there, you'll find it under the audio courses with some other audio courses. You'll see a clearer description of the course itself there if you're interested. Anyway, thanks for listening. Appreciate it.